You're listening to dialectradio.co.uk, your local community radio run by volunteers. Log on to our website at dialectradio.co.uk to find out more.
Since the Jimmy Savile expose, many people have been talking about child sexual abuse. In fact, it's become much more acceptable to talk about many things that have been going on in Britain for decades. Suddenly, they're being exposed. And today, we talk to somebody who's from one of the organisations that's trying to deal with this. It's called the People's Tribunal. It's a collection of people who have themselves been sexually abused, who are trying to run a tribunal of their own because they don't have much faith in the government's Goddard inquiry, which is being staffed by people from the Home Office, which is actually part of the allegations are against the Home Office itself. And so we hear now from Cheryl Corless from the People's Tribunal about child stealing by the state.
I'm Cheryl Corless. I was abused in the care system and I was just ignored, and we've already spoke about that on another show, but years later I left an abusive relationship. It was worse than abusive. He was a monster. He'd already done a lot of time in prison already for violent crimes, so everybody knew what he was.
Cheryl, I mean, it might sound like an obvious question, but how did you find yourself with someone like that?
Well, when I was abused in the care system, I ran from care and I was homeless for a year. I lived on the streets for a year. I was only 17. And then I got pregnant and the father left me. And then I was 19. I was on my own with a new baby. And I went in a bed and breakfast because I was still homeless. Like they put me in a bed and breakfast as I had him. And he was in the bed and breakfast. He was 28. I was 19, and I was very vulnerable, really vulnerable. I was messed up from what had happened to me in care and living on the streets and everything. And he must have seen something in me because he came, do you know what I mean? And then just gradually just took control, and the violence, it just got worse and worse over the years. By the end of it, I was pregnant with our son, and he'd smashed me across every wall going up the street, dragging me up the street by my hair. He'd be kicking me in the stomach because I didn't want the baby. He'd rape me. It was horrendous, and it ended up with me. I was in labour with our son, and I told him I was in labour. I had a contraction, and he came down, running downstairs and punched me in the head. So I ran to the phone box across the road just to get away from him, really, and I ended up giving birth there in the telephone box.
So your partner at the time, did he stay with you after you'd had that child?
No, when I got out of hospital, he beat me up then, and that was it. I couldn't take anymore. I think my mental health, when I look back now I've had my mental health sorted, and I look back, it's pretty obvious I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I got rid of him, he made my life hell for about a year. He was always shouting through my letterbox, trying to get in, breaking in. Oh, it was awful. In this time, I started drinking heavily. I felt stronger when I was drunk. If I'd had a drink and he came round, then I'd fight him back and I wasn't scared of him. It was a twisted circle. But in this time, then it all started coming back about what had happened to me in care, and I started to think, like, maybe that was wrong. Maybe I didn't deserve that. Maybe I didn't deserve what he'd done to me neither. And I went to the social services and I told them that I think I've been abused in the care system. And it was just like, well, what can we do about it? It's a long time ago. Like, they just basically didn't want to know. And the next thing you know, I've got a social worker on my case.
So how long ago had it been when you told them?
I was 25 when I left him, so it would have been 8 years since I'd run from care.
Now, were some of the people still working in the care system that had abused you?
Oh, probably, yeah. My home had been shut down, the home where it happened, but they were all shuffled around the system, and it was just like they didn't believe me a bit. As soon as I told them, then that's when they decided that my children needed to go on child protection.
So how did they actually do that? And how did they make the decision? And did they actually just come literally with the police or something and take children away from you?
No, because you have a child protection meeting where you've got about 20 professionals sat around a table, and it is so, how do I put it? It's really overwhelming and it's frightening. And I had these child protection meetings when I was in care, and so it's just throwing me back to there. Do you know what I mean? And no matter what you say in a child protection meeting, they all agree with the social worker. So they all decided that my children needed to be on child protection. They hadn't needed to be on child protection while I was in a violent relationship. The police had told me they couldn't help me when I was in the violent relationship. I didn't get any help or support for that. And then they had them on child protection, and my ex-partner's still playing games with me and tormenting me and just terrifying me, basically.
So at this stage, how many children did you have, and what ages were they?
I had 3 at this stage. One was 5, 3, and the baby in the phone box, he was 1. It was when he got to 18 months old. They came round with the police one day and decided they were taking him. I didn't find out till much later, but the time they was on child protection, my ex-partner and all his family, they were ringing social services on me every chance they got, making complaints about me. So it was building a case up against me. Do you know what I mean? Even though I hadn't done anything, they was ringing up and saying, well, Cheryl's done this and Cheryl's done this. And so then they ended up taking my children.
So what accusations were they making against you?
I was a risk of future emotional harm and neglect. When it got to court, that time, I just kept thinking all the time, every day, like, well, this can't go ahead. This can't go ahead. Do you know what I mean? The truth will come out. The truth will come out. And then at the end of it, they gave 2 of my children to my violent ex. Even though he had a 9-year criminal record, I'd been in hospital with broken bones off him. The police had been called out numerous times because of what he did to me. They still gave 2 of my children to him. And my eldest child was forced adopted. And the day that it was forced adopted, even now, it still hurts me now to think about it now. Like, he's a grown man now, but it was like the judge had given me the death penalty. And as she did it, I heard this screaming, and it was me, and I'm on the floor, and I didn't even know how I got there. And all the social workers and barristers and everyone were all high-fiving each other on a job well done because my son had been adopted, and it was just awful. And then they just left me. As soon as they took the children, they just left me. They had a psychological report saying that I was delusional because I was saying that I'd been abused in care. Because I was delusional, apparently, about the abuse in care, then I was delusional about my partner hitting me, and I was the violent one, they were saying. And my son went for forced adoption, and the other 2 went to him. He let me see him for 1 hour a month. That was it. I know that he wasn't a good father to them, but no matter how many complaints I made, social services didn't want to know. It was like, why was it always my abusers? Why did my abusers always win? But do you know what I mean? It must have been something that was wrong with me. I spent the next few years just basically getting drunk all the time. I had a massive drink problem. And then I met somebody else, and he was violent as well, and I got pregnant off him, but then I escaped while I was pregnant, and I thought, no, this is it. I've stopped drinking. I thought, no, I'm going to have this baby. And then I think I got to about 6 weeks pregnant. The eldest had been in adoption for 3 years. And then I get a knock at the door, and it's the social worker that had taken him. And she said, the adoption hasn't worked. He's back. And I said, what do you mean the adoption hasn't worked? I said, you took him off me because you said that I couldn't give him a stable life. And she said, well, he's back and he wants to come home. So we're going to start this program to bring him home. And the following year, when I had my son on the 11th of May, and on the 12th of May, my eldest son, who was then 12, he came home forever. And all the assessments that they'd done in the first time when they took the children, this time they came back and it was all perfect. And I was a fantastic mother, and he had a high IQ and just totally amazing. And then he come home and there was no problems. And then I met my husband. we had another child. We was happy. The children were loved. They were protected. They're lovely kids. The eldest ended up leaving home when he was 16. He came back from adoption with a very, very lot of problems, a hell of a lot of problems. And social services just left him there. They didn't offer him any support. They didn't offer me any support. They put that much into splitting us up. But then when it came to putting us back together, there was nothing there. And then we ended up, I was pregnant with my fourth child with my husband. I had a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And I was pregnant with my fourth child. And my husband left me. And I ended up giving birth at home. Again, I had one of them stupid births again. And I ended up giving birth on my own at home with the kids there. So then social services got involved again. And this was 5 years after my eldest had come home from adoption. And then this time it went through court again, and it was exactly the same as the first time. The second time, when I got all the good assessments, and they were telling me that I was good and this, and I had a high IQ and everything, that had all been forgotten. The court didn't want to hear any of that. All they wanted to hear was the bad ones that they'd used when they took the first children.
So did they decide that they wanted to take this new baby and leave you with the other children that you were okay to look after?
No, they took them all. They ended up, they got involved when the baby was new, and then they put me on child protection. And oh my God, for that 11 months, I did everything backwards just to keep hold of my children. They would come round 9:15 every single morning. And by then, I'd had one child at school, dropped him off at school. I'd had another one, dropped him off at nursery. And then I was back and I'd fed and dressed all the babies and everything. Everything was ready. And if they came in and the breakfast pots hadn't been washed yet, or the bedding hadn't been made yet, because I'm rushing out for school, they was like, you're a pathetic mother. You're a pathetic mother. Look at the state of this house. You don't deserve your children. And they bullied me in every single sense of the word for 11 long months. And then eventually they took them. And then when they took them, what I didn't know at the time, I refused to sign anything this time. I said, no, I'm not signing anything. You're not tricking me with anything. And I refused to sign anything from day one. And I've got witnesses to prove that. And then when I got my paperwork back last year, they've got a forged signature saying that I signed them in care. And they was in care for 8 months before any court proceedings were started. And because they needed the extra evidence, so as soon as they'd taken them, they gave me a psychological assessment. And this time in the psychological assessment, they agreed that I had been raped in the care system. But because I'd been raped in the care system, I was a risk of future emotional harm and neglect. And it was just so horrendous. And the social worker that it was a team. You had the social worker, the social worker manager, and the area manager, and everyone I tried to complain to, they was all laughing at me and saying, "When any of your complaints go in the shredder." And I kept saying, "They're working as a team," and everyone was going, "No, you're being paranoid. You're being paranoid." As soon as they took my children after my first contact, they made sure that I waited. They told me to wait because they wanted a word with me. The social worker that had took my children, they presented her with a bouquet of flowers on a job well done. And then 3 months later, I find out that these same people that were all working together, that I was told I was being paranoid about, all opened a new business for independent social workers where they get money from the court to gather evidence for other people. And
Cheryl, what's that? Is that company still around? What's it called?
Yeah, it's called Heather Card Associates.
So can you spell that for us?
Heather, Heather, CARD Associates.
So anyway, how did you deal with having to go to court? And did you have a solicitor, that sort of thing?
I had a solicitor, and this is where I realised that the solicitors in family court, they get the same amount of pay whether you win or lose. So they can't be bothered. They want more customers coming off the social services. So they do what the social services want, basically. My social worker, she just didn't like me. And she made it very clear. And I've got my paperwork now. I got all my paperwork back last year. And in it, my social worker, when they're talking about a care order, my solicitor, when they're talking about a care order, He's saying, can we get this job over and done with fast? I need to get my car into the garage because I'm going on holiday tomorrow. And the Guardian of Lighton, he's supposed to be the children's solicitor. He's supposed to be the children's voice, and he goes to the court and he says what he thinks is right for the children. I met him outside the court and I said, have you met my children? They're lovely children, aren't they? And he says, no, Cheryl, I haven't met them. I don't need to meet them and I won't be. And then he went into the courtroom, ended that, they went for forced adoption. And now 2 of them have been forced adopted by a member of the team that took my children. The other 2, they're now 10 and 11. They haven't been allowed to see any family member for the last 4 or 5 years. They haven't been adopted. They're in long-term foster care, but the court put them on a placement order, which means that I've got no rights as a parent to contact. And last November it was, I went to a meeting and they said, we're going to take the placement order off and we're going to resume contact. The children have wrote your letters, we will be sending them to you, and we'd like you to write back. And I'm still waiting now for these letters and for this court hearing to start. And until they remove this placement order, I can't even have contact with them 2 little boys that have been stuck in the system, not seeing each other or anybody else, because they wanted the little 2 adopted.
So do you feel like you've had your children stolen?
Yes, definitely. It was a planned attack. It was a totally planned attack. The way they bullied me is like my next door neighbour, like she was only 17 at the time. She was doing a childcare course at college and she witnessed it herself, and that stopped her wanting to go into childcare. She witnessed it herself and she says, I can't believe it. And my little niece, I used to childmind my little niece, she was only 7 at the time. She's hiding in the dining room one day because she'd heard how nasty these social workers were with me. And she's hiding in there and she's hearing them saying that my little girl is ideal for adoption. Why do people like me have children like her? Because my daughter she's a very beautiful child. And that still haunts my little niece now. Do you know what I mean? She's 13 now and it still hurts her head now. And the cousins, and they've not been allowed to see any of the cousins, and it's affecting the cousins on this side. And it's just so wrong. Why put them in a system that has already failed me? My abusers have got my children and I can't do anything about it. And it's like being in a nightmare with my eyes pinned open and being forced to watch this nightmare ongoing, and there's nothing I can do about it. I've been to 25 different solicitors I tried to take my case on, and not one of them will take my case on. They don't want to know. Nobody wants to know, because family court is secret court. Nobody knows what happens.
Just go through your children and when you last saw them and what that contact was like.
My last contact with the adopted 2, my little boy was 3, and he asked the social worker, no, he asked me if I'd marry him. The social worker was stood there, and he asked me if I'd marry him. And I said, I can't get married, sweetheart, I'm your mummy. And he says, yes, but if I marry you, then I can come and live with you. And that's just stuck in my head every time. Do you know what I mean? That's all I can think about is that poor little boy. And he used to pick twigs up off the floor and he'd point at the tree and he'd go, that's a mummy tree. And then he picked the twig up and he said, that's an Alfie tree, that's his name. And it just breaks my heart. My little girl was only 2. I've got 5 sons and 2 daughters. My second daughter is my second eldest. So I'd had another 4 sons before my daughter. So she was very, very much wanted and cherished. And it was just horrendous. And my little boys, the last time I seen them, the foster carer made up a story and said I was shouting abuse at her when I was coming out of the contact centre. And I'd never said a word to her. I was on the telephone. I hadn't said a word to her. I hadn't even looked at her. It was hard enough seeing my children drive away anyway. And it's just some of the foster carers. I'm not saying all of them, because I have seen some amazing foster carers, some really amazing ones. But some of them, they think that they're better than you. And they will do anything to make things difficult for you because it's hard work for them. They've got to come in from school, then go out to contact. They don't want to be doing that. They get an extra £500 per child per week to look after that child, but not if it disrupts their routine. The majority of them only do it for the money. It's a cruel, wicked, horrible system. And this future risk of emotional harm, 75% of children in the care system in the UK now have been taken for the future risk of emotional harm, neglect. Nothing has happened to them. That's a credible cause to go to court. The judge just ignores everything you say and just does exactly what the social worker's asking to. They don't even listen to what you're saying. They never get your children's name right when you're in court. It's it's just horrible. And then because you're shouting and you're getting upset, you're getting called volatile. But what do you want us to do? Do you know what I mean? I did everything and more. I really did, and them children did not deserve being taken off me. They didn't, not at all. They've gagged me as well. The court gagged me and told me I'll go to prison if I tell my story. Well, I'm not bothered. Send me to prison, and then maybe we'll get to proper court, Crown Court, and then we can get my case out in the open and we can talk about it.
Cheryl, what do you put it down to? I mean, what's behind? What's the motivation for this treatment of you?
There's profit in the care system. I believe that we were left to be abused when we were in the care system to keep the wheel turning of the system in the future when we had children. I believe so. Then that was an excuse for us to lose our children. There's profit in it. There's so many social workers now got multi-million-pound fostering agencies and social workers. I don't know if it's true, but I've seen it in a lot of papers. They get bonuses for if they get enough adoptions for that month. And so they don't go after the broken children. The broken children, they're not going to make any money in adoption because they don't want a broken child. An adopter wants a perfect little baby that's going to match the little house and the handbag. They don't want, do you know what I mean? It's the abused children. That's what the care system was made for. But they're just ignored in favour of the pretty children, the ones they can sell. I thought it was just me. I really thought for a long time. I just thought my face doesn't fit. I must have done something wrong in a previous life for all this to happen to me. And then I found support groups on Facebook, and it's thousands. There's thousands of parents like me all screaming to be heard with basically identical stories. It's just horrendous. The amount of ex-care children their children are in care now is ridiculous. I mean, if that care system was so good that they've got to take our children for the future risk of harm, and it was so good, then why is that care system failing so many people?
So what do you think needs doing? If you were sitting in I don't know, David Cameron's chair, and you say, right, we're going to change things, what needs changing?
I think the whole care system needs reforming, the whole thing. I think they've got it wrong. It's like, in my family personally, it's been going on for 70 years. My mother was a care child in the Irish residential schools, and then me, and it's like every generation, it's 3 generations in my family that have been broken by the care system.
You tried, didn't you? Didn't you try to break out of that?
Pardon?
Didn't you try to break out of that cycle?
Yeah. I tried with all my heart, and it just wasn't good enough. It's like once you're a care kid, it just feels like you've got a big red stamp on your file, and nothing you can do. Nobody wants to listen to you. The psychiatric reports they give for the court, they just say what the court wants them to say, and it's proved that in my notes where when my eldest son came back, the psychological report was saying I had no issues. And nobody's ever told me. I didn't know until 3 years ago what mental health issues were. And it was only when I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and bipolar, which was probably caused by what I've been through, that I realised that, oh, maybe I've had mental health issues all this time and the tablet could have helped me. But nobody bothered to tell me. It was just loads of jargon, and it's like, well, the psychotherapist with this case, she said, I recommend the children come home, but 6 months of therapy for Cheryl first, and then 6 months of therapy after that with Cheryl and the children. And the social worker sat there and said, but we're not paying for that. If you want that, Cheryl, you'll have to pay it yourself. This was the therapy that my doctor said I'd imagined because he'd never heard of it. It was called schema-focused therapy. And I couldn't get it anywhere. Nobody would give it to me. And the social workers were saying they weren't paying for it, even though the psychotherapist had said it because of what happened to me in care. So they owed me that. And they didn't. No, they just went, no, we're going for adoption instead. And I wasn't given a chance at all. It was horrible. It was.
What motivates the social workers that have been, doing high fives when your kids get taken away, get bouquets of flowers? That's what motivates them?
The bonuses they get. They're going to get promotion because they're getting the kids in to adopt, and that's what the government drive is at the minute. And it is for the adoption drive, and the adoptions are now for the government is Martin Neri, and he was deputy head at Medemsley. That's another horror story in itself. What happened to them boys? And he didn't notice all them thousands of boys being abused, but the government think he's the perfect man to have a say in adoption.
So who's this and where?
Martin Neri. He was the in Medemsley. Medemsley was a boys' borstal. Not sure where it was. If you Google it, you find it. But it's horrendous abuse happened to young boys there. Horrendous. And Martin Neri was the governor there. And then he went from there. He got a job as CEO for Bernardo's. And then he's gone from there, and now he's the adoption czar. But he didn't notice all these boys being abused. Is that really somebody that should be making judgments on people's children? It's like, our children are ours. The government own our children, basically.
So how do you survive day to day, Cheryl? Are you on your own there?
Yeah. I don't. I won't have a relationship. After my marriage broke up, I'm not even trying again. I'm very close to my sister-in-law and my nieces and nephews, and they keep me going. And the People's Tribunals kept me busy these last couple of years. But since they went, basically, I've just been an activist, and I've just tried to get the truth out in any way I can, in any ways. I went into Westminster Abbey, I think it was 2 years ago, and I squirted some paint on a statue. I got heavily fined for it, but I just wanted to get in the newspapers because I thought if I get in the newspapers, then I'm on Google. If I'm on Google, then if the kids try and find me, they can see that I'm here and I'm still fighting. I've tried going to all the journalists. I've tried any single way, and nobody wants to talk about this hidden secret of forced adoption. It's exactly what the nuns were doing. But social services have taken it over. It's still wrong, it's still immoral, and it's still happening. And I just feel so lucky that I never got a baby took at newborn. I've seen so many people, they're waiting at the bottom of the bed while they're giving birth to catch the baby and take it off them. And I don't think I'd have survived that. I don't think I'd have got through that. It's like, say somebody lost a child, like, because people, they lose a child for some stupid reasons. But if you lost a child and somebody adopted that child, if that parent gets pregnant again, the adopters get first choice on whether they want that child. So if the adopter decides they want that child, then as soon as that child's born, it's taken.
That was Dialect for this week, and I'm Tony Gosling. Thanks very much to our guests. That was Ian R. Crane and Cheryl Corless from the People's Tribunal, and also to studio engineer Dave Pazanko. Please join us at the same time next week, and we're online at dialectradio.co.uk. See you next week, and bye for now.